Section 28 of the American Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The American Egypt by Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Section 28. Slavery on the Haciendas. Part 1. O cochinos, cochinos! You wake and turn in your hammock. Through the veranda doorway the breath of morn comes chill to you. The stars twinkle still, and the orange trees are blots of black shadow in the quiet garden. And then there comes to you, again and again repeated, the haunting melody of this cry, the reveille of the hacienda. The Indians are herding the pigs. But if they called, "O pigs, O pigs," there would be none of the romance that there is in this long-drawn weird cry, "O cochinos." Outside in the yard a hustling crowd of pigs worry round a heap of pumpkin gourds. In the semi-darkness the bare-legged Indians with scarlet blankets wrapped round them move to and fro, the boys chasing the pigs and the fowls, and the men foddering the mules and horses in the corral. Thus does every hacienda throughout Yucatan awake to its day's work. While it is still dark, the Indian families tumble out of their hammocks, and the housewife builds a little wood fire in the blackened ring of stones on the earth floor, which serves for kitchen range. The coffee is boiled, and crouching round on their hams, the family drink it black and munch the coarse tortillas of yesterday's baking. Then the boys herd the cochinos, and the men, if it is a ranch where cattle are kept, struggle out into the woods and round up the cows, driving them into the yard to be milked. But this is rare, for there is very little milking done in Yucatan, partly because as a drink milk is not appreciated by the Yucatecans or indeed by the Indians, and partly because such pasture as exists is of the coarsest kind and the cows are nearly always dry. When you have seen one hacienda you have seen them all, allowing of course for the difference in size. A large rambling one-storied stuccoed house raised on a small terrace, with a wide arcaded stone veranda in front, and standing in a huge yard bordered by grey stone walls, its surface the natural earth and rock, its entrance usually a pretentious archway, almost ecclesiastical in its pitch and size. Round the yard cluster the huts of the Indians, the corral for the mules, stables, and what not. Most of these haciendas, at any rate those deep in the country, have a very shabby and down-at-heel appearance. Between the pompous gateway, the iron gates have sagged off their hinges or are missing altogether, their place being taken by two hurdles fastened together by ropes or loops improvised out of lianas. But just around Merida, where are the haciendas of the richest of the henequen lords, much has been done of late to turn these farms into lordly pleasure houses. Money is no object to the Yucatecan landlord, and his apathy or want of taste is all that can set limits to the beautifying of his country seat. At the hacienda of Yaxche, 18 miles out of the capital, we saw a good proof of what money can do in the hands of an intelligent landowner. One of the greatest difficulties in Yucatan is the lack of feed. Grass, as we know it, will not grow, and the best that can be done for the cattle is to provide them with the coarse clover. At Yaxche Two large paddocks had been planted with this and were watered by a contrivance which had cost no less than £30,000. Into several large round galvanized water towers, erected on iron trellis work standards 30 feet high, the water is pumped from the limestone wells by steam. From these large tanks pipes lead out to feed smaller ones running in parallel rows from one end of the field to the other at distances of about 6 yards apart. Every 20 yards along these small pipes a standard is erected about 5 feet high, on the top of which is a rose like that on a gardener's watering pot. When the water is turned on at the tanks the pressure attained from its height forces it along the pipes up through the standards, and a few seconds later the whole field is being deluged with an artificial rainfall as if from a myriad fountains. 3 times a day the clover crop is thus watered. By the time the sun is up, the cattle have been tended and the Indians are off to the milpas or the henequen fields. The description of the latter we leave to Chapter 21, where we give an account of the whole henequen industry. Apart from this comparatively artificial product, maize is to day what it has always been for the Peninsula, what it was to the Mayans 4 centuries back, the be all and end all of Yucatecan agriculture. The Indian is a poor farmer. He has not moved with the times. It is true that in many localities he has not had the chance, but it is also true that he would not take the chance if it offered. The plough is unknown, and if a benevolent society was formed with the object of presenting one to each Indian labourer, he would not be able to use it because of the nature of the soil, which is for the most part a very thin layer of earth on a rock bed, and also because he never takes the trouble to properly clear the ground. An Indian cornfield would give an Essex corn grower a shock from which his constitution would never rally. There are 2 ways in which the farmer in Yucatan sets about making his maize patch. Each or at least every second year a new piece must be claimed from the dense woodland, for the poorness of the soil does not allow more than 2 crops to follow each other. The commonest method is to first clear the patch by cutting down the trees one season for the next. After this has been done, the timber is allowed to lie where it falls and rot during the rainy months. When the dry season comes, the whole fallen timber is set on fire and all but the largest of the trees are burnt, the charred remains of these lying in all directions year after year. The second method, apparently the most ancient and that still used by the present day independent Indians, is to fire the forest at the end of the dry season in May, just as it stands, cutting down the large trunks that escape the flames about a yard from their base and letting them lie where they fall. In this condition the Indian considers that his patch is ready. To view it after having been used to English fields is at once rather a strange and depressing experience. Charred tree trunks lie scattered in all directions. Tree trunks that have been cut off a yard or so from the ground stand up like the piles of a pier at a watering place after a heavy gale in which the deck of the pier has been carried away. Huge boulders and stones of all sizes are scattered over the soil, making the use of machinery absolutely impossible. But to the native of Yucatan it seems ready enough, and as soon as there comes the first heavy rainfall at the opening of the wet season, the Indians go out to the fields to plant the corn. This is all done by hand, being dibbled in much the same way as is often seen in the fen districts of England, when a cottager has a patch too small to get a corn drill to work. The rest is on the lap of the gods, though the Indian has little reason for anxiety, for the rain is sure to come, and then the sun baking down on his sodden milpas will bring up, as if by magic, the long green shoot presently to swell out into a golden yellow crown of leaf shrouding the cob. The Indian harvest is about our Christmas time, and the labourers troop into the milpas, wicker baskets slung on their brown backs, and pick the cobs, dropping them over their shoulders into the baskets. Milpas are seldom of any great size, and the harvester usually carries his load back to the hacienda when he returns thither for the first real meal of the day, which he takes between 10 and 11. His menu is of the simplest, monotonously the same from year end to year end, just that fare upon which his lowlier ancestors toiled in the sun to build pyramid and temple. Black beans, always black beans, sometimes crushed into a purple black pulp, sometimes frizzled in lard, sometimes with a thin vegetable soup, the stock, pork, peppers, garlic, and a slice or two of pumpkin gourd. To this staple dish of frijoles there is very seldom added any meat save when he has been able to bag a chachalaca on his tramp to the milpas, or a hacienda pig has been killed. Tortillas and coffee, not always the latter, complete his meal. Before the hour of noon he is back at his work till about 5, when his day's labour is over. There is no hardship in all this. It is just the simple life his race has always lived, and that which the average Mayan always would wish to live. There would be no hardship if, and it is a large, large if, the patient toiler were a free man. The Yucatecans have a cruel proverb: Los indios no oigan sino por las nalgas. The Indians can hear only with their backs. The Spanish half-breeds have taken a race once noble enough and broken them on the wheel of a tyranny so brutal that the heart of them is dead. The relations between the two peoples is ostensibly that of master and servant. But Yucatan is rotten with the foul slavery, the fouler and blacker because of its hypocrisy and pretense. The peonage system of Spanish America, as specious and treacherous a plan as was ever devised for race degradation, is that by which a farm labourer is legally bound to work for the landowner, if in debt to him, until that debt is paid. Nothing could sound fairer. Nothing could lend itself better to the blackest abuse. In Yucatan every Indian peon is in debt to his Yucatecan master. Why? Because every Indian is a spendthrift? Not at all, but because the master's interest is to get him and keep him in debt. This is done in two ways. The plantation slave must buy the necessaries of his humble life at the plantation store, where care is taken to charge such prices as are beyond his humble earnings of 6 pence a day. Thus he is always in debt to the farm, and if an Indian is discovered to be scraping together the few dollars he owes, the books of the hacienda are cooked, yes, deliberately cooked, And when he presents himself before the magistrate to pay his debt, say of $20 (£2), the haciendado can show scored against him a debt of $50. The Indian pleads that he does not owe it. The haciendado court smiles. The word of an Indian cannot prevail against the señor's books, it murmurs sweetly, and back to his slave work the miserable peon must go, first to be cruelly flogged to teach him that freedom is not for such as he, and that struggle as he may, he will never escape the cruel master who, under law as at present administered in Yucatan, has as complete a disposal of his body as of one of the pigs which root around in the hacienda yard. It is only by a comparison of the law of death in Yucatan for a white man, as the Yucatecans love to call themselves, that one can realize how wickedly unjust all this is, and how deliberate is the conspiracy to keep the Indian in a bondage which spells fortune to his master. For the Yucatecan debtor there appears to be no punishment and no means of compelling him to pay. Here is a case in point. To a store in Merida comes a Yucatecan who, falsely representing himself as employed by one of the richest of Meridan merchant houses, gets a typewriting machine valued at $225 on credit. He goes off with it and at once sells it, for thus obtaining money by false pretences he is not punished, nor can the defrauded shopkeeper recover his goods or their value except by tedious processes which will cost him more than he has already lost, even if he wins the day. Now, had this thief been an Indian, he could have been instantly arrested, his debt sold by the shopman to any haciendado, and the fellow would have become a slave for life. Thus is law meted out by the Yucatecan conspirators. The Yucatecan millionaires are very sensitive on the question of slavery, and well they may be, for their record is as black as Legree's in Uncle Tom's Cabin. You have but to mention the word slavery and they begin a lot of cringing apologetics as to the comforts of the Indians' lives, the care taken of them, and the fatherly relations existing between the haciendado and his slaves. Very fatherly indeed, as we shall shortly demonstrate. They take just so much care of the Indians as reasonably prudent men always take of their livestock, so much and no more. We have spoken earlier of the recent visit paid to the country by President Diaz. It was the first time during the whole of his long reign that the great man had troubled himself about the limestone peninsula which forms the furthermost eastern part of his dominions, and the trembling Yucatecans looked to the bolts of the cupboard in which the family skeleton was hidden, and they were not over satisfied with those bolts. They had new locks made and new and thicker doors fixed, so that august presidential ears should not be offended by the rattling of those most unfortunate bones. With their teeth chattering, they hastened to put their house in order and sweep and garnish it, for they knew quite well that the eyes into which they had to throw dust were eyes which could see further than most eyes. It was all the fault of a snobbish governor. Many a henequen lord must have cursed the self-importance of their parvenu chief, which had induced in him such discontent with the Spartan-like simplicity of his rule at Merida, that he must needs wish to entertain presidential guests and bask in the sunshine of the mighty Diaz's approval. Diaz, they knew very well, cared little or nothing for Indians qua Indians, but Diaz cares immensely about the fair name of Mexico, which they knew they had done for years all they could to besmirch. Would he see the skeleton through the fatal door? If money and bribery were of any avail, those slave owners would see to it that their terrible ruler should be fooled. But they had to calculate on more than his natural perspicacity. There was much reason to believe that ugly rumors had reached Mexico City of the slavery rife in Yucatan, and that the President's visit was not unconnected with this. That skeleton must be cemented into its cupboard with the cement of millions of dollars if necessary. Well, the President came. Never were there such junketings. Night was turned into day. Roadways were garlanded. Gargantuan feasts were served. Lucullus never entertained Caesar with more gorgeous banquets than the henequen lords of Merida spread before Diaz. Small fortunes were spent on single meals. One luncheon party cost $50,000, a dinner cost $60,000, and so on. The official report of the reception reads like a piece out of the Arabian Nights. In their eagerness to keep that skeleton in its cupboard, some of the haciendados actually mortgaged their estates. One of the most notable of the entertainments provided was that of a luncheon at a hacienda 90 miles southeast of the city of Merida. At the station where the President alighted for the drive to the farm, the roadway was strewn with flowers. Triumphal arches of flowers and laurels, of henequen, and one built of oranges surmounted by the national flag, spanned the route. The farm workers lined the avenue of nearly 2 miles to the house, waving flags and strewing the road with flowers, while a feu de joie of signal rockets was fired on his alighting from his carriage. He then made a tour of the farm. Having inspected the henequen machinery, he, we quote from the official report, visited the hospital of the finca and the large chapel where the Catholic labourers worshipped, the gardens and the beautiful orchard of fruit trees, and during his tour of inspection he honoured several labourers by visiting their huts thatched with palm leaf and standing in their own grounds well cultivated by the occupants. More than 200 such houses constitute the beautiful village of this hacienda, which breathes an atmosphere of general happiness. Without doubt a beautiful spectacle is offered to the visitor to this lovely finca, with its straight roads, its pretty village clustering round the central building surrounded by gardens of flower and fruit trees. At the luncheon the President in the course of his speech said: "Only can a visitor here realize the energy and perseverance which, continued through so many years, has resulted in all I have seen. Some writers who do not know this country, who have not seen as I have the labourers, have declared Yucatan to be disgraced with slavery. Their statements are the grossest calumny, as is proved by the very faces of the labourers, by their tranquil happiness. He who is a slave necessarily looks very different from those labourers I have seen in Yucatan." The prolonged cheers and measureless enthusiasm evoked by these words, one can understand how the conspirators chuckled at the success of their efforts at deception, were agreeably interrupted by the appearance of an old Indian, who made a speech of welcome in his own language, presenting a bouquet of wild flowers and a photographic album filled with views of the hacienda. It is not necessary to quote the fulsome stuff which had been placed in the mouth of the poor old man by his master. It is simply a string of meaningless compliments which ends with these words: "We kiss your hands. We hope that you may live many years for the good of Mexico and her states, among which is proud to reckon itself the ancient and indomitable." Surely a pathetic adjective under the circumstances. Land of the Mayans. Well may the official report say that "it is only justice to declare that the preparations of the feast and the decorations of the finca showed that the proprietor had been anxious to prepare everything with the most extraordinary magnificence." This feast was a gigantic fraud, a colossally impertinent fake from start to finish. Preparations indeed! That is the exact word to describe the lavish entertainments of Mexico's ruler here and elsewhere in Yucatan. Tens of thousands of dollars were lavished to guard the haciendados' secrets. In this particular case the huts of the Indian labourers which the President visited were fake huts. They had been, every one of them, if not actually built for the occasion, cleaned, whitewashed, and metamorphosed beyond recognition. They had been furnished with American bentwood furniture. Every Indian matron had been given a sewing machine. Every Indian lass had been trimmed out with finery and in some cases, it is said, actually provided with European hats. The model village round which the President was escorted was the fraud of a day. No sooner was his back turned than to the shops of Merida were returned sewing machines, furniture, hats and everything, and the Indians relapsed again into that simplicity of furnitureless life which they probably cordially preferred. We are not quoting the faking of this village as an example of hardship dealt out to the Indians, but as a proof of the ludicrous efforts made by those whose fortunes have been and are being built on slave labour to hide the truth from General Diaz. As for the poor old Mayan who addressed him, and as for the deputations of whip-drilled Indians who were paraded before him to express their untold happiness and loyalty, they very well knew that they had got to do exactly what they were told to do. We are not exaggerating when we state that it would have cost any Indian his life to have even attempted to make General Diaz aware of the truth. No Indian throughout civilised Yucatan could have been found to make the attempt. For nothing is sadder than the lack of all manliness and spirit which characterises the average Indian workman. It is the story of the Russian mujik over again. There is no combination or loyalty to each other among the hacienda Indians, and this is what makes possible what we are about to relate. End of section 28. Recording by Shena Ser, Fresno, California.